Hello, friends. This is Dave Horowitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with They Gave the Premiere and Then Made Recordings and Lived to Make Recordings. Well, this is a premiere that got recorded more or less at the same time as the premiere. Not the same performance, of course, but this was a piece suggested to me by our very own Jed Distler, the piano maven, the god of piano recordings. Yes. And Jed said, don't forget Vladimir Horowitz doing the Barber Sonata. And oh, he's so right. My goodness, what an amazing conjunction of artist and repertoire and recording technology that was. Because Barber wrote his Piano Sonata around 1949, 1950. He wrote it for Horowitz. Horowitz played it. He premiered it. He played it around. And then he recorded it in 1950. And here it is. Here's the recording. And actually, it remains the reference recording of the Barber Piano Sonata because, of course, it was written for Vladimir Horowitz. And when he put his mind to it, oh boy, could he make a reference recording. Really an amazing, amazing fact that probably a lot of people don't remember or pay attention to. You know, I did a video recently on the dearth of 20th century piano sonatas. It's not that people didn't write them. I mean, people did, but, sonatas that entered the repertoire, sonatas that people know about and that pianists play regularly. Because back in the day, way back in the day, sonatas were generally written by the composers who performed them. Then they started to be written for others to play. And when that happened, the number of sonatas diminished greatly because composers weren't going to write dozens of sonatas if pianists weren't going to play them. So they would write one for a pianist or two, the Romantic period. Brahms only wrote 3, for example, as opposed to Beethoven's 30 some odd. So by the 20th century, where we had crazy piano virtuosi who were almost entirely focused on the classical repertoire, that is, playing music by dead people, it was even more complicated. Even Rachmaninoff, remember, who could play, he played his own music and was fabulous about it in the 20th century, yet only wrote 2 piano sonatas and had a great deal of trouble with it. It's kind of interesting, that question which we tried to address previously. So Barber only wrote a single piano sonata, and he wrote it for Horowitz. But remarkably, that sonata got premiered. Everybody acclaimed it immediately, and it entered the repertoire of great 20th century piano pieces that serious pianists who played any kind of contemporary music had to play. And they did. And it's been recorded like dozens of times, which is just like, it goes to show that the classical repertoire isn't quite as ossified as people say it is. It really depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the work. It depends on the composer. Now, you may say, oh, it's Barber. The sonata is a conservative piece because he was a conservative composer. Well, it's not really. I mean, it really isn't. I mean, it's highly chromatic. It uses tone rows in various ways. You could argue, if that's a selling point, for most listeners, of course, it's a negative, not a positive, but you could argue that it really is not in any way a retrogressive piece. It does conclude with a fugue. I mean, it does have a neoclassical element to it, of course, but it's still, obviously contemporary, not an easy work at all. Neither was the Copland Piano Sonata. I mean, these were gnarly pieces. And the reason they were gnarly was because these composers could write chamber works that were in a much more forward-thinking idiom than big orchestral pieces, because big orchestral pieces were even more likely to need to be conservative than chamber works, which could be played for connoisseurs and cognoscenti and cogna people, people with cogna. They could take music that was a little more difficult, I think, a little bit more intellectual. And so the Barber Sonata is one of his most forward-thinking pieces. And it still didn't prevent it from becoming extremely popular and very highly acclaimed. And it's not, like I said, it's not easy. It's not like a sleep through it kind of piece or just bathe in warm, lush, romantic harmony, but it has its tonal elements, and it's really pretty simple to follow. And it's just expressively, like all Barber's pieces, very, very spontaneous and intense, and it's fantastic. And Vladimir Horowitz, right here, gave us the premiere and the premiere recording. And good for him, because he was well on in his career in 1950 and, didn't have to do anything with contemporary music if he didn't want to, but he did it. And good for him and good for us. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.